All right, so this is a video that's going to cover some of the new sound setup for coming in phase two of the style library. So I definitely recommend watching the full video, especially if you're going to try to use some of these new features. Um, the library is going to do almost all the heavy lifting for you when it comes to setting up these new effects, these new features, and these new styles. But there are additional sounds. There's brand new sounds in OS7 that have to be set up, and there's new ways to set up your font to support some of these features. So that's what I'm going to touch on today. If you have questions, if you're unsure about anything, or if something doesn't work, so you say the library doesn't work, or you get the style code and you go to put in your config and that doesn't work, or you load the config and something on your Saber doesn't work, all of that, just post using this link. It's a Crucible link. It allows me to keep everything in place. It answers questions for people to come in and see in case somebody else has the same question. But it's also a way for me to keep track of what I've fixed and what maybe needs fixing. I know there's a lot of groups that support ProffieBoard, but for the OS7 stuff, anything coming from the new libraries, there's going to be very, very few people in those groups that understand what's happening because this stuff is so new. So this link here is the way to get everything answered. It's also the only way anything's going to get fixed. That being said, I've done as much debugging as I can do. This library is just about ready to go. I got to clean up some of the documentation and some of the notes that are produced. So some of the stuff you may see me generate in this video might look slightly different at launch because I want to clean up the wording. I want to make it as clear as I can for how to set this stuff up. Now I'm going to shoot a separate video of the style I'm going to build here just so you can see the end result. But I'm going to try to cram a whole ton of new features into a single preset. And again, we're going to set up the font to support. Now, some of the things are already preset just because of time, but you would set those up in your font. So I'll show that. So that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video game type style. Now, we did obviously have multi-phase. We had party mode in phase one. Phase two ups that. So I'm going to add some other new interactive, some other new special ability type things to make your preset and your ProffieBoard Saber even more like a video game experience. And there's even more coming. I have a lot more in the works that will be, some of it will be added to phase two kind of over time. Some of it is definitely going to require additional interfaces, so that would move it to phase three. But there's a lot of stuff in here just in phase two already at launch. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to use a pre-made recipe. I'm going to go to the party mode 2, which changes the visual effect and the color and the sound effect just to match the Jedi Survivor video game. That is based on the Kyberphonics font, but it will work with any font that's set up to support the alt font capability. The video here covers alt font. So watch this video if you need additional help on alt fonts and setting up multi-phase. This will be specific to the sounds for these new features. All right, and I'm going to do my main blade. I'm just going to activate it. So it preset using the recipe most of what I need. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to leave all this standard. I'm going to make a couple changes in special abilities. I'm going to add some new special abilities, and I'm going to add some interactive capabilities to make this even more like the video game. And these features are only in ProffieOS7, and most of them will require my prop to run, along with the changes we're going to show in terms of setting up your font. So next phase will leave, previous phase will leave. Those are already pre-explained. I'm going to change special ability 3 to be the new rain mode. So rain mode is a new mode that you can set up, and it adds a visual and a sound effect that you can toggle on and off. Just like in the video game, when you're in a rainy environment, you'll actually get a visual effect of actually I can toggle it now that it's active. I won't hear anything, but there's a sound effect that goes with it, which we're going to set up in the second part of this video, which is what you need in the font to support the sound. But if I do special ability 3, you'll see it's going to add the rain effect to my blade. And then if you want to turn that off, you just do special ability 3 again. So that toggles it on and off. And when it's on your Saber, if you set the font up, it will also toggle the sound. So in the past, we've had rain effects. There are other rain effects in the library, but those are just that visual effect, and they're always running. They don't have the sound effect, and you can't turn them on and off. The new interactive special ability for toggling rain mode allows you to choose when you want to have the sound and visual effects active. So that I'm going to set up for special ability. If you want to change the color of the rain, you control it here. You can use any of the style arguments, or you can choose a fixed color. If you want it to be editable, just choose one of the arguments you're not using for something, so like swing or force color, and that would make it editable. You can technically edit it along the top here, or you can edit it through edit mode or workbench or a style argument. That will give you the ability to change the color of those raindrops, up to and including if you like the rain dent effect, that would just be turning it black or a very dull color. But that is, I'm going to change special ability 3 in this recipe to that. I'm going to leave party mode active, and I'm going to leave it as the random swing. I'm going to start using special ability 5 through 8, which happened while the blade is off. So I'm going to set up, I want to set up some kind of special scenario. So I'm going to set up a play sound and ignite on number 5. And I'm going to use a quote, and I'll show you what I'm setting up. So I'm setting up a specific quote, where a specific quote means it's going to look for that quote file, or in my case, it's actually going to look for that quote group. And we're going to cover that and how you set that up in the font once we're done. And I want to have a delay on this. So I'm going to put I'll put a second. So this is milliseconds, so 1,000 milliseconds is a second. I'm going to put a delay. So what that means is it's going to play this specific quote from the font, and then it will wait a second, and then I will get the ignition. And you can set the ignition effect up to be anything you want. So special ability ignition effects can be separate and unique from your main ignition effect. So you can actually, again, there's 4 special abilities while off. You can set 4 different ignition types, plus you have your default ignition. So you can have 5 ignitions. They can be completely different from each other, different speeds, different effects. You can have power-ups, all kinds of different things, and that gives you even more diversity in what you're able to do with your saber. But you set those as special abilities, and then they're triggered via the special ability. So this one's going to play sound and ignite, and I'm going to speed this one up. I'm going to have it go relatively quickly. So he's going to randomly say something from this quote group 1, and then about a second later, it's going to ignite the blade, and it's dramatic effect. And then I'm going to set special ability 6, another play sound and ignite, but this time I'm going to play track. And I'm going to add roughly a 2-second delay. So track, now this depends on your font. If you set up a tracks folder, it's going to play the first track it finds. If you don't have a tracks folder, it's going to play the default track of the preset. And if you have neither, then it doesn't play any sound. So that's part of the font setup. But you can now, what's going to happen with this setup is if I do special ability 6, I'm going to have a track begin playing, and I know the track I want. And then about 2 seconds after that track starts, the ignition is going to happen. And I want, for dramatic effect, I want this ignition to be slower. So I'm going to slow this one down, make it take longer. And then for special ability 7, I'm just going to do a special ignition with a power-up effect. So I'll do an unstable power-up forward. I'll leave that as ignition color, which is white. So I get a power-up effect on if I do special ability 7, whereas the other ones don't have that effect. And then we'll do special ability 8. I'm going to do a random phase and ignite. So what that means is while your blade is off, if you do special ability 8, it's going to randomly select a phase, so one of your 8 color and sound combos, and then ignite it. And that'll give you, you can just randomly have your blade color changed when you ignite it. This is separate from party mode, but you can still jump into party mode. You can still use the other special abilities to change the phases. It's just a unique ignition effect that we can do. And on this one, I'll make this one a little quicker. And then actually, yeah, I'll make this one quicker, and I'll add a power burst forward power-up effect. All right, so that's just setting up some new special abilities for while the saber's off. 5 through 8 run while it's off, and it'll give me different ignitions. So right now I don't have sound set up. You can set that up. But so if I do special ability 5, there's going to be a delay because the sound would have been playing, and then it's going to do the ignition. So there's that ignition. Special ability 6, again, it'll play the track, but then it'll ignite. But there's a delay. And then we get the ignition, and that one was a slower ignition. Special ability 7 is going to be just a power-up effect on top of the ignition. So there's that power-up effect. And then special ability 8 is going to randomly select one of my phases and then ignite with a power burst forward. So I've got a cyan, and what that means, because it's randomly selected, if I go back and do it again, I should get a different color. So each one should be randomly selected each time you do that ignition. So it gives you, and then again, because I have the other special ability set up, I can do my phases. so I can roll through them and get to the color I want anyway. Or you can go back, or I can turn on rain mode, or I can turn off rain mode, or I can turn on party mode. So party mode, when you hit here, you have to just swing, and it will change randomly, and then you can turn it off. So those are all, again, one preset. And if you have the alt font set up, which is required for this style, all different sounds. So you have 8 blades, right? I lose track. Let's look. We have 8 styles. We start at style 0. So technically we have 9. I keep saying 8. I forget that the numbering is 0 through. So the first one is 0. So 9 colors, 9 sounds, 9 visual effects, 5 different ignition types, including ignitions with sounds, rain mode, a party mode, and then the last piece of this to make this even more like a video game, I'm going to add the interactive blast. And single blast just means for every button press, you're going to hear a blaster sound, and then you have to deflect it. So the interactive part, now when you, interactive blast replaces your normal blast effect with an interaction. So when you hear the blaster sound play, you have to quickly move your saber to deflect it. If you don't, there's no visual or sound effect of the blaster bolt deflecting, because it makes it more fun and it makes it more realistic in that even in the video game Jedi Survivor, you don't necessarily have to block every blaster bolt that's fired at you. Some you dodge, some are just not on target, etc. Interactive blast brings that to your saber experience. So you'll hear blaster firing sounds. Those are new sounds we're going to set up. And then you choose whether or not to react to it. If you swing to deflect, and it's not even really a swing, it's a quick movement of the blade, it will deflect the bolt. You'll see it hit the blade. You'll hear it hit the blade. If you don't move your saber within a fixed time, so there is a time setting, that's these reaction times. They are editable if you find that it's too easy or too hard. But single blast is 1 per button press. Continuing blast sets it up so that every time you deflect, shortly thereafter, it'll fire another blaster sound, and then you have to react to that one. I do have other modes coming. Those are a little more complex, so they're taking me a little longer to work through, but there will be more coming. This is just at initial release. There's single and continuing blast, but I already have the random one close to working. I have to tweak the timings. I found it was a little too tight for all the reactions, but there will be a random one coming in the very near future. What that is, it's going to randomly choose, I think I have it set between 2 and 5 bolts at a time. So you press the button and randomly you're going to get 2 to 5 consecutive bolts, and you choose each one whether you're going to deflect it or not. So if it say it randomly chooses 5, if you deflect the first one, the second one will fire. If you don't deflect the second one, meaning you either dodged it or you just didn't deflect it, it'll still fire 3, 4, and 5, and you'll still have to choose between those. So that will be coming. I know I'm going to get questions on that. I just didn't have it working perfectly, so I didn't want to put it in the library at launch. Once it's working perfectly, it will be added, and I'll do the announcement. But so that's going to be added. And then we can go through and add a ton of other stuff, but I think this is a lot already. So let's talk about the sound. So this piece is very important, and this is why this video is here, and hopefully you stuck around. I'm going to generate my style code. This is one of the reasons that phase 2 has taken so long, is first of all, making the library able to set all these styles up because they are a lot more complex. But secondly, being able to document everything that you have to do because these features are more advanced. So this library generates style code and a style information section. That style information section in OS 6 was very important. In OS 7, it's of the utmost importance because there's a lot of information on making this style run properly. So I'm going to go into a config. Now, I already pasted this just to test it earlier, but I'm going to wipe out what I pasted just in case I made any changes. I want to make sure that I'm talking specifically to what we just built. So in here, all this stuff is pretty standard. The reason for this information, though, is if you ever want to remake this blade and make some changes, these are everything you've selected. So this allows you to go back and make those changes and produce the same style or changes to the style. On top of that, there's a lot of new information in here, and we're going to go through each piece, and I'm going to show you how it corresponds to your font setup or something you've done. Now, the alt stuff has its own video, so alt font I'll show quickly, but I'm not going to go in depth on that. The other ones I'm going to put a little more focus on. But since we're using multi-phase control, This style requires special abilities to change the phase, and it requires alt font. All right. So what that means, if you build this style library and you load it to your Saber, but you put a font on that does not support alt font, none of the phases will run. It will just always stay in the default. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It will still work like a Saber style. You just will not have access to the other phases, even if you have special abilities turned on. It's kind of a multi-part system. That's why these are more advanced. You have to have the style code for multi-phase. You have to have the special ability control for multi-phase, and you have to have alt font support. And those pieces working together are what make that style work. And it requires my prop. Most of the OS7 features require my prop. Part of the development of OS7 was because there were so many new things coming. We put them into my prop. That way, people who don't want them or need them, they don't necessarily have to worry about that coming in their OS or using up memory that they aren't going to actually have to use. So that's the reason why most of these features are only in my prop, was so that I set defines up to make them work and not work, but also to isolate what runs them from the rest of the OS for those who don't necessarily want to use them. I don't know why you wouldn't want to use them, but that's the reason. All right, so control layer, and this is, I've kind of touched on this a number of times. The library is expects that you're going to have one main blade per preset. A lot of people have accents and crystals. You might have side blades for your cross guard. You might have a dual blade saber, but it expects only one main blade. So by default, the library automatically only sets a control layer, which is a very special layer of style code that interacts with the prop to make most of this run to your main blade. If you try to use this style code twice in one preset, a lot of stuff won't work. The reason being, the control layer is essentially working with the prop to trigger stuff. If you have two styles within a preset that have control layers, they're sending redundant commands. And a lot of the commands are, if you send the command once, it does one thing. If you send it a second time, it undoes that. And that's the bulk of them. So what happens is, if you have two styles sending the same command, the first one does it, the second one negates it, and nothing happens. And it's so quick you wouldn't even know. So that's the reason when you see this style includes a control layer, only one per preset. What you would do if you love that style and you wanted to use that style on your other blades, it's very simple. The library handles that. Just come to right above special abilities where it says enable control layer, just uncheck that box. It generates all the code necessary to do the exact same thing without the control layer to control it. So that was a big piece of phase one, but I think a lot of people miss that. But that is very important to keep track of. If you load up two styles in a preset with control layers, most of your special abilities, most of your control type things won't actually run. Then this style, again, we talked about this above, requires these specific folders. So it requires Alt 000 through Alt 008. What's in those is totally up to you. You can just have maybe just the hum changes, or you can have completely separate fonts in each of those. There is a video on that, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it, but that does have to be set up for this particular feature to run. And there is a sound effect on when the changes happen. If you don't want the sound, don't include it. But a lot of the fonts that are working with me to set up these multi-phase support, they are including the sound. If you don't like the sound, you would just change this file in your font. And that's what triggers when the phase is changing. So it's meant to be, typically it's either like a menu sound, or it's like the sound of a crystal either rotating or being replaced, because that's what it's meant to be. Most of your multi-phase stuff is changing the colors and effects, so it's almost like you were swapping the crystal in your saber. So that's what we usually would use. But it can be any sound you want. It could be a statement. It could be anything. All right, and there's more information on that. All right, now we're going to get to the new stuff. So like I said, alt fonts, the whole other video at the top of the library for that. So let's go through. A lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward, but we're going to get to Interactive Blast first. All right, Interactive Blast, this will tell you what you've chosen, but it's also going to tell you what you need. All right, so Interactive Blast replaces your standard blast effect, but it requires a new sound. So When your blast, this first of all control requires the blast out wave. So we'll show that. So in the font, in the past, you always had this BLST. That was your blaster deflection sound. That's in pretty much every Proffie font I've ever seen. The new sound is just BLAST. That is, it's literally a single letter, but it might confuse some people. This sound you add to your font. Now, some font makers do include extras that have blaster sounds, and I think I'm not as familiar with the other boards, but I believe other boards maybe have blaster sounds that you can choose from, or you can create your own. But the blast, BLAST, those should be the sounds of a blaster firing. And those are the sound effects that you will react to then trigger the blast, the BLST sound and visual effect. And you can set these as many as you want, but you do need blast, and then you obviously need sounds. And any font in Proffie has to always be sequential. Don't skip any numbers. So if you have multiple files, they should go 0 to whatever, or they can technically go 1 to whatever. But it can't go like 1, 4, 2 or 1, 4, 6. It has to be 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It always has to be sequential, or else you're going to get an error. But these are new sounds you're going to add to your font in support of interactive blast. And they can be anything you want. But they're intended to be a blaster firing, and it's a sound that you will react to. All right, and that is covered in the style code. And then this is the default, how long you have to react. So that's chosen. I set it up as Citizen, Padawan, Knight, and Master. And it's just 2,000 milliseconds, 1,500 milliseconds, 1,000 milliseconds, or 500 milliseconds. 1,000 for me is realistic. I can probably it gives you a little extra time. 500 milliseconds, you have to be really quick with the movement. And again, it has to be a quick change of angle of the blade. It's not necessarily a full swing. It's just a quick change of angle. The quicker the angle changes, it doesn't have to necessarily move as far. But so that is what's going to trigger the blast effect, is you moving the blade to deflect it. So even just in the Ahsoka series, if you watched when Balin was deflecting, he had these kind of short, tight movements. That's essentially really all that's needed for interactive blast. But you have to set up that sound because the style is expecting it. So what will happen, you press your button, so like 2 button, you press aux, you're not going to get a blast effect. You're going to get a blaster sound, and then you have to react to it. If you're missing the blaster sound, what will happen is, first of all, your time to react is affected because it accounts for how long the blaster sound is. But secondly, you're not going to know when to deflect, so nothing happens. If you happen to press the button and move it in time, you would get the blast effect, but it's not interactive per se because you're missing the blaster firing sound. And that blaster firing sound can be anything you want. If you wanted it to be like a stormtrooper saying, like, hey, you, and then firing, you can just put that sound in, and that's what would happen. All right. Then the other big pieces now, I did touch on in my live video, but I wanted to get a little more precise on this. So rain mode has its own special sound, and it's the TR loop sound. And there's a couple ways you can set that up. So we're going to show that. And it's telling you roughly what it expects. Again, you can do whatever sounds you want for these, but basically the library is outputting what it kind of expects or what would work best. These sounds are not necessarily supported by font makers yet. Hopefully they will be, but you might have to go hunting for some of these sounds. And you have to name them specific to what the library says. That includes the numbering. So TR loop and the TR, so you'll see here TR here. Those are specific sounds, but they're also specific numbers of sounds. The TR loop and the TR sound are generic sound effects for OS7 that allow us to do multiple things. So there's going to be styles that you build that may have multiple TR loop requirements. There will be a different number file. So you might have one effect calls TR loop 0, the next calls TR loop 1, the next calls TR loop 2. The library's handling that based on what options you selected. That's one of the pieces that took me a long time to develop, was a way for the library to also understand that it has to support those sounds. So make sure you're reading and associating those sounds with the effects that are going to actually call them. The style code calls for that sound, but you have to have that sound in your font, and you have to have it numbered to how the style code is calling it. But so in this instance, what we set up uses TR loop 0 and TR 0. And then there's also a quote set up, and this one is set up for quote 1. And that's because I wanted a specific quote to play. All right. So how these work, you'll see it says it can either be that specific wave or it can be this setup. This is what's considered a sub sound. What that does is, even though this is going to call TR loop 0, if you had a couple of rain effect sounds that you wanted to randomly pick from, you would name them just like this, and you would put them numerically in the TR loop folder in a subfolder. And then what will happen is the style code will call for TR loop, it'll call for 0, but it will randomly pick a wave out of this. And everything, again, has to stay sequential. You can't skip numbers. But I'll show that. Same thing with the TR sound. So say you had a couple of sounds you want to randomly run through, but the style code is picking a specific sound. You can set that up this way. And then finally, same thing. I'm calling for a specific quote, but if I don't want it to always be the exact same quote, I would put it in this format, and it could randomly select from the first group of quotes to play. So how does that work out? So we'll use quote because I believe I set quote up that randomization here. The setup is the exact same for each sound. They just have to be in different folders. So in quote, you'll see I have these folders set up. And the style code is calling for quote 1 or quote slash 001. So here, it's going to call this folder. Then if I want more than one sound, I just number them. It has to be 3 digits. There's a couple requirements for setup. There's a document in pod on this right here. Sub sounds is what it's called. But it's very simple. You have the numbering like this, always sequential, always starting with 000, and then you can have a couple groups. This style will only call for this folder, but you still have to set at least the 00 up if you're calling 001. You can't start at 001. It has to start at 00. But I'm not calling this one, so this one, for all intents and purposes, can even be empty. But in here now, I've got multiple quotes that I only want from this quote group to get called, because so the reason would be, say I set up 4 special abilities to be different quote groups. So say I wanted characters. Say I wanted one character to speak when I do special ability 5, a different character to speak when I do special ability 6, a different one for 7, a different one for 8, which I've done in some early demo videos. You would set up 00, 001, 002, 003 to be those individual character groups, but then randomly set different quotes of that character like this. And you can call each of those individually. That's that mini MyCom. There's a video on my channel about it. But these are quotes that I want used, but I want them randomly. So then you just number them like this, starting at 000 all the way through whatever the last number is, again, without skipping a number. And when the style calls for quote 1, it's going to call this folder, but it's going to randomly select. If you only have one quote that you want to call specifically, like a catchphrase or something, you would only set up quote 001, which is the other option. So that's this option here. This is if you want a single sound to always be called using that special ability. It would just be named quote 01 or quote 001. When it's just a single file, you don't necessarily need the leading zeros. But with the randomization, it does require the 3-digit setup because of how it works. But so you have those options. Now, the same exact thing applies to all of it for the TR and the TR loop, or any sound that a style is going to call. So there are other options. There's going to be more in the future too. But this holds for all of them. If you want a single specific sound, name it the name. If you want to select from a group of sounds, you would set it up with the subfolder setup. So then what I've set up here is I did set up my TR loop, and I only have one. So say your style calls for more than one, you would number them advanced, but I only use one file, and that's my rain. That's the rain effect. So you'll see it's in here. It says it uses TR loop 00.wave. That's the rain sound looped. If you wanted to have a couple different variations on rain sounds, you would do the setup like we did for the quote, and you'd set it up and call for that, and then you'd set them up like that. And then also for party mode, I'm doing just the single sound, but again, if I wanted to randomly have, I would set up in the font the TR sound. So that's here, the TR sound, all right? And then the last bit is I set up a tracks folder in here. All right. So what's going to happen, the way the track, so if you remember, we set it up so that I have one of my special abilities, number 6, I think, will play a track, and then about 2 seconds later it ignites. The track is going to be, because I've set up for track player, which runs through my prop, it's going to always pick the first track, and that's the first track that the SD card indexes. So it's whatever, typically it's the first track you added to that folder. The way the SD indexes is based on typically when it's added. If you dump a bunch of files in, that can get mixed up. If you don't want track player, or you're not using track player, but you want a specific track to be called, you would do that as the default track to your preset, which is here. But the track called through the style code is a little different than tracks running through the prop. So in the prop, you have the option to play the default track or use track player. The style code can't do that. The style code is either or. So it's looking to see if track player exists, which is that tracks folder. If the tracks player exists, it grabs the first track that's indexed and plays that. If there is no tracks player setup, it will choose this track. And if, say, you didn't include a track and you don't have a tracks folder in your font, no sound plays. But if you're not going to play a track, don't use the style code to call a track. It wouldn't do anything. There's no sound to play, but you're technically using a couple bytes of memory for something that you're not going to have. But so that's the last bit of it. But so I'm going to do a demo video of this style I just built with these sounds intact, walk you through everything. And I'm going to put this up on the library and make this available. Definitely, hopefully everybody has watched to this point, understands how this works. For those of you who come in later and have a problem with stuff being set up, I'm going to point you to this video. That's the reason I'm making it. But hopefully everybody will have watched it. It will make it a lot easier for you to set this stuff up. If you don't understand anything I said, though, like I said, top of the library, questions or issues, just click this link and post what you're having. Screenshots, those of you who are new to Crucible, don't post a screenshot. It takes up memory on the Crucible, and Frederick will tell you, and I'll tell you not to do it. If something doesn't work on the library, just describe it. Say, oh, I tried to pick this style with this option and it didn't work, and I'll look into it. If the library properly generates style code and you go to compile it and you get an error, that's still something I'll address through the library. You just have to post your style code and I will then address it. Or it's better to post your whole config, because in some cases, if you didn't set certain things up in your config, that could also be the reason stuff doesn't work. But any questions, any issues using the library with style code from the library, or when you go to compile from the library, just post it in that thread and I'll answer it as quickly as I can, and we'll try to get to the bottom of it. And if you have questions about how to set stuff up, first and foremost, I'm going to say, did you read all this code at the top, or all this information at the top? Because this took me a really long time to write, specifically so that you wouldn't have questions. So this will be the first thing I point you at. If you read that and you don't understand something, I will explain it a little further for you. But if you read through this, it's intentionally written to help you set everything up properly, in combination with this video we just did, in combination with additional support. But all of these new features coming for OS 7 are a little more advanced. They are not beginner features. I'm doing everything with the library and all this information and these videos to help you get set up. And once you set them up, they really aren't hard, but this is a lot more advanced than anything we've done with Proffie. And OS 7 is a lot more advanced than the previous OSs. So as we've gotten more and more features added, more and more complex, stuff gets a little bit newer to people and it requires a little more work. But all these effects, and there's so much more coming. This is, again, small sample. We'll support you guys, help you guys get it working, because at the end of the day, everything I build so that you guys can enjoy it. This is early access. Thank you to all my patrons. This will be, phase 2 will be early access through the end of December on my current calendar. Could go longer. I do have additional stuff coming in phase 2, so it'll be kind of like mini releases in phase 2 as I get like the randomized blast for interactive blast working. I have a bunch of other new effects coming. There's a lot of stuff coming. Some of it will be in launch. If it's not in launch, but it's close, I will add it over the coming weeks. But definitely check everything out. Look through the whole library. There's so much in phase 1 that I don't think people realize. There's 10 times that in phase 2 that people probably haven't been shown yet. Just play around in there and look at all the features. And if you find something you're not sure what it means, just ask. So hope you enjoy.